Welcome to LUTV News in Focus, where we feature interesting topics on campus, in the community, and in the world of culture. I am Tommy Byers. With inflation at a 40-year high, many Americans are left feeling the effects at the grocery store, gas pumps, and in their daily routines. The COVID-19 pandemic, supply shortages, and the conflict in Ukraine has been blamed as reasons for the increase. Lamar University Economics professor Dr. John McCollough is here to join us to help us better understand the cause and effects of inflation. Thank you, Dr. McCollough, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. We talk about the rise in inflation, but can you help our viewers better understand what inflation is?
Well, inflation is the general rise in prices of all goods in the country. So it's not just one specific product. Say, for example, I don't know, meat or gasoline. It's a general rise in all the prices throughout the country.
And so what really causes an inflation?
Well, it's interesting you say that because there can be two causes. One is there could be supply shortages. That's one. The other is that demand is increasing at a faster pace than supply is, and that would also cause inflation.
And coming off of the COVID-19 pandemic, I know there was a lot of supply shortages. We've seen toilet paper shortages, and other companies, they just stopped making supplies. So how much effect does the COVID-19 pandemic have on our current inflation?
Well, it has a tremendous impact. For example, what you just said is correct. There have been lockdowns at various manufacturing facilities throughout the country and actually throughout the world. However, on the other hand, what happened is when there was the lockdown, a lot of workers were staying at home and not going out. And so there became what was called a pent-up demand. And as soon as the vaccinations came out and as soon as people started to ease up and COVID rates were going down, demand surged like crazy, but there weren't the supplies there to meet the demand. And so there was a shortage of supplies in the marketplace. But it was primarily driven by the increase in demand. And then that caused inflation, prices to spike.
And right now we're at a spike. We're at a 7.5%. What does that mean for individuals that are going to the gas station looking for gas and supplies and other core necessities?
Well, what it does, the big picture is that it decreases the American consumer's standard of living. Their budget doesn't buy as many products as it used to be. And so their standard of living decreases whenever there's inflation. In this case now, we have a 40-year high in inflation. So the consumers are feeling a big pinch.
And grocery stores are also feeling this pinch. So what is the effect of inflation on the supply, import and exports?
Well, that's funny you say that because it's a little bit complicated. So if America's having inflation, but your trading country is not having inflation, then that trading company will buy less of our exports and will buy more of their imports because they're not having inflation. We are having inflation. Vice versa, though, if our trading partner is having inflation and we're not, then we'll buy less of their products, so our imports from them will go down, and they'll buy more of our products, so their exports will go up. So our trade balance will either increase or decrease depending on which country is having the inflationary effect.
And I know that a lot of major chain stores, they can balance the inflation a lot better than our small mom and pop stores. So how does an inflation rise impact local small businesses versus these big chain stores?
Well, it impacts them more because the big chain stores, and particularly Walmart, can dictate prices to their suppliers, whereas the smaller stores can't do that, and they just got to live with the higher cost of the products. So they get hit harder than the big chain stores.
And higher prices, they erode most Americans' budgets. They're having to tip into their savings a lot sooner than they intended to. So what does that mean for the lower and middle class Americans that usually they live paycheck to paycheck?
Well, that's exactly right. So they get hit harder by inflation. And particularly so their budget, they spend more of their budget on day-to-day products. And as these products are increasing, they get hit harder. Now, let's say you're a very wealthy individual, then you don't have to spend as much of your income on the day-to-day products. So they might not be able to save as much, but their savings are still increasing. But as far as the middle income and the lower income consumers, they get hit harder because everything that they're buying, the price is increasing.
And over the last 20 years, we've really seen a rise in inflation and things like that. But based off of war, we just came out of the war with Afghanistan. What impact did that have on our economy and our inflation rates?
Well, the inflation rate has been very, very steady since prior up to 2008. So it had been very steady for a long time. As a matter of fact, when I was younger, when I was in college, the inflation rate was just this high. And then the central bank created a severe recession to bring inflation under control. And since that time, we've really had no serious issues with inflation. The central bank could handle it pretty well. However, the Afghanistan war really didn't bring on any inflationary prices. The war in Ukraine now has elevated the amount of inflation that we were currently experiencing now to more dramatic levels.
And speaking of those dramatic levels, recently the Treasury Department has used verbiage that has really got individuals on their toes. And they're talking of, and maybe individuals are thinking of a recession. Do you feel that we may be headed into a recession, or is that too early to assume that?
Too early to assume that. So when I was in college, our inflation was running about this level at the time, maybe even a little bit higher. And so the central bank purposely created a severe recession to bring inflation down. Now the recession didn't last that long, but the unemployment rate jumped up to about 10%. But now the central bank is thinking of raising interest rates to choke off inflation. And that will put some people out of work when they do this. But it's too early to tell exactly how many people will be thrown out of work. And then, but the fearful thing, what the central bank is extremely afraid of, and this happened when I was in college, it's what's called a wage inflationary price spiral. Because prices have increased, workers demand a higher wage. The bosses give them a higher wage, then the bosses got to raise their prices. And then the following year, they're still behind, the workers are still behind the 8 ball in terms of inflation, so they want a second round of pay increases. The bosses give it to them, and as the bosses give it to them, then they got to raise their prices again, and around it goes. So there'll be like a third round. Workers are going to want a higher wage to make up for the recent increase in prices. And so the bosses will raise prices again. And like I said, it's like a revolving door.
And on that topic, I know during the COVID pandemic, we received at least 3 stimulus checks. Did those stimulus checks pay into the inflation rates now, or did they have
I think
no
they did, absolutely. That's a good question. I think they really did, because people were getting these stimulus checks that never lost a day of work. They were still employed. Say, for example, like a government worker, they were still employed, and they were getting stimulus checks. So that was just extra money, and they just went out and they spent it.
And so, do you have any advice for individuals that are feeling the recession on maybe ways that they can help themselves economically?
Yeah,
to not
absolutely.
feel it?
The best thing that they can do is to shop around for better prices. They can go to bargain basement stores, maybe the dollar store, to shop for products. They can go to discount department stores to shop for products. That's a true way to do this. But I just want to get back to this one thing, this wage inflationary price spiral. We had that when I was in college. But the reason why we had that is because our workforce was more unionized, so that they could, the union in itself could ask for higher wages. And the bosses had to deal with the unions. But now we've basically lost all our unions in this country. And so it'd be very, very hard to see this wage inflationary spiral.
Well, thank you, Dr. McCollough, for joining us today. And thank you for watching LUTV News in Focus. To see more content from LUTV News, follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook.